other one, you bastard!
Brought to you by supporters who probably have better taste than this schmuck.
2022 was, to say the least, not a good year for IDW Comics. What was once a thriving pillar of the comics industry, surpassing even some of the old titans, was now waning and slumping into sales disarray. Reasons on this are difficult to come by, as most internet discourse is inevitably tainted by baseless complaints of wokeness. Forgetting that diverse representation is part of what helped put IDW on the map in the first place. Digging into forums, a few reasons pop up. Many claim the comics were just boring compared to their predecessor. IDW 2.0 definitely adopted a slower burn approach to sell the political thriller aspect, and it might not have been to Transformers fans' tastes, especially monthly readers who weren't experiencing much happening. Inconsistent artwork was also cited as a factor, and I can definitely see some die-hard comic fans taking issue with this. I don't believe the general public would have found this too bad, and personally I don't take issue, but I can see this as a criticism. But for me, I believe the primary issue was accessibility. 1.0 was marketed to everyone, and drew people to the franchise. 2.0 was marketed to toy collectors and existing IDW fans. And when you try to focus on keeping existing fans rather than engaging with new ones, it only leads to a downward spiral. Like making a copy of a VHS over and over. The fandom degrades and bleeds fans. The start of the year confirmed IDW would lose many of their Hasbro licenses, including Transformers. Most sources believe their dwindling sales are the catalyst, but other parts of the franchise have chugged along fine, even as the revenue slips. Of course, the accessibility of these comics was most likely a factor of said dwindling sales, but the sales themselves weren't what caused Hasbro to shift focus. Rather, it was Robert Kirkman, creator of Invincible and The Walking Dead, who initiated talks to wrestle the rights to his own co-owned company, Skybound Entertainment. The changing of the guard is always a time for concern. The franchise has seen many reboots, some great, some heinous. Whether this new continuity would deliver on the heart and soul of Transformers was and is known for remains to be seen. So let's remain a bit and let's closely see. 2023 has wrapped up with 9 issues released in total, spanning across both Transformers and a new story, Void Rivals. This is a year of Skybound releases in review. Today we take a look back and see if the Energon universe truly managed to start something special.
You are now entering Diagnosis Insanity.
As accessibility in new comics is always something a new series has to tackle, it was up to the task of Robert Kirkman to introduce a brand new audience to the world of Transformers. If you're a comics or manga fan, you've likely seen the memes going around in regards to where people start. While it may get comic fans riled up believing it to be an insult to the pedigree of the medium, it is kinda true. With so many series sharing the same name where some are jumping on points and some aren't, getting into comics can be very daunting. Take Dreamwave for instance. I got some comics from a friend that were called Transformers 1 to 5. That means they're the start of this, right? Well, actually no. They're a sequel series to Dreamwave's Cybertronian stories, like War Within and others. They're also really ridiculously edgy and a chore to read, but that's beside the point. Point is, you gotta start strong, something that IDW 2.0 arguably did not do. To face this issue, Kirkman commissioned 2 series starting out, Transformers and a new IP called Void Rivals. Void Rivals would front-run the continuity, drawing in new viewers interested in a more experimental style of storytelling, while Transformers would catch the fans of the IP. If I had to hazard a guess, this was likely to funnel fans from one into the other, then both into the G.I. Joe projects of 2024. They were pushing this series hard in comic book stores, wedging Kirkman's pedigree to get people excited. Given a widely popular adaptation of his work was still in public consciousness at the time, and arguably still is, this was a pretty good call. Weirdly enough though, the issues themselves seemed to claim that the crossover aspect was a big surprise you discover upon reading, despite the fact the posters for these were basically everywhere. Not sure where this idea came from, were the people getting surprised living under a rock? I mean, we didn't know we'd specifically see Jetfire in issue 1, but we knew the series would be tied somehow. As for how successful the marketing would be, that remained to be seen. Throughout the year, my journey with the Energon universe would be captured in short, bite-sized analyses. What you're about to see are reviews of each of the 9 comics released within the year of 2023, each reviewed at the time in which they came out. If I make an inaccurate prediction about one of the sections, it's because at the time I was not aware of how the releases would pan out. I couldn't, and still can't, tell the future, so some predictions may have been right while others may have been incorrect. Still hope I'm accurate on HasLab Omega Prime though. Give it to me! But enough dawdling. These are the comics that Skybound Entertainment dropped under their Energon Universe banner, in order of release. Let's do this! It's a new Hasbro shared universe, and things are off to an okay start. I appreciate the smaller scope, especially with the limited character count. The art style conveys the desolation very well. I appreciate the slight roughness the characters get, juxtaposed against the beautiful but foreboding sky. Seems right up Lorenzo's alley. The good Lorenzo, not the bad one. Though the characterization could be a lot stronger, as you don't get a real feel for the two personalities right off the bat. You do get some nice character moments here and there, though, subtly woven into the story. This is mostly because they put a heavy emphasis on world building. It's economical and doesn't bombard you with unknown terms and technobabble, but it does get repetitive at times. Yes, we get it, y'all are bigots. You don't need to reiterate that. And for those confused, yes, this is the start of the new Transformers series. Though its inclusion seems a bit forced. It's sort of like, oh hey, here's a Transformer you know. Okay, he's gone, bye. Either way, I am interested in seeing where this goes, but going forward, I want to see some more characterization for the main duo. I want them to make me care about them, so hopefully things go well. Undeniably, the real star of the show with this issue is the artwork. Felici once again really hammers home the hopelessness our two heroes find themselves in, while also nailing the stark and almost sterile atmosphere of the Argorian nation. Also, I really want to see more of what the Zertonian side looks like. Looks like David Lynch's Dune with the turquoise cranked up to 11, and compared to the first issue, the characterization is vastly improved. Again, it's kinda subtle, but Derek and Solila are sort of coming into their own as distinct archetypes. The problem, again, is the insistence on pushing world building over characters. To reiterate, it's done in a digestible manner, and I commend them for that, but there has to be a balance. They're really just repeating facts we already know or are already implied for between about a third and half the issue. Yes, we get it. It's a Xenogears type narrative. We know. Also, not gonna lie, the inclusion of the Skuxoid really was a curveball for me. Really made me step back and go, wait, who? It does make me a bit concerned that the franchise will focus far too much on G1, ignoring the vast and diverse history of the franchise. As someone who lived through the Warden era, this isn't a prospect I'm particularly fond of. Still, not guaranteed yet. Kirkman at least has a fondness for Bulkhead, and the panel discussions from SDCC show a real drive to build this universe properly, so we'll have to see. Either way, solid issue again. Could be better, but shaping up to be a decent, if familiar, type of story. While I still enjoyed this issue, it's definitely the weakest of the three by far. Massive props to them finally figuring out a way to balance the world building with the character moments. If the chapter was entirely character based, it would be a new height for the series. Unfortunately, what they've swapped this out for is character cameos. The Quintesson is nice to see, and the Skuxoid is awesome until they pull a Jetfire and vanish from the issue with no consequence on the story. It's quite annoying. I really want to see more of these characters. I want them to be characters, not cameos, but so far they just show up, say a few lines to get you intrigued, then leave. Yes, it's only been 3 issues, but as a monthly reader, that's 3 months. It's not a weekly series. We need to develop a rogues gallery at this point. Then the ending undoes practically all of the development of Derek and Solilas so far, or at least it would seem it does. All that friendship they've built up? Poof, gone. It just leads to an overall frustrating issue, but hey, at least the comic is fully serialized now. They have more room to breathe, so at least we can rest easy knowing there's more issues featuring our dynamic duo. Also, this issue featured a preview of next month's issue of Transformers 1, and a leak of an iconic Generation 1 scene recreated in comic form has been circulating on Twitter. Yes, Twitter, not X. And much like the last couple of issues, I'm concerned this is just going to become G1 but edgy again, as if we haven't had enough of that in recent years. They did say they were going to introduce other continuities as they went, but given the rumblings, I'm worried these won't come into play until late 2024 at the earliest. Again, as someone who's lived through the Warden era, I don't want this to become the case again, especially now that the franchise is reaching new heights with continuity diversity. I'm not saying I'm not excited to see Prime throw it down on the court. I'm just saying the direction has me a smidge pessimistic. Hope I'm wrong, but my gut is telling me otherwise. Now this was a good issue. We're in the Kislev prison arc of this Xenogears type narrative, and I really think this comic has hit its stride now. Wasn't particularly fond of how the last one ended, but this one manages to spin those events in a really interesting and unique way. The progression feels natural, the emotions feel earned, and they even sneak in a sweet title drop.
He did it! He said it!
Felici's art is also the best it's been the entire series. In previous issues, I expressed a desire to see more of the Zertonian side, and now that we're finally seeing it, Christ, I'm blown away. The establishing shot early on tells you everything you need to know at a glance, and it does so beautifully. The stark temple in the middle while the rest of the city is a misshapen combination of old skyscraper and Kowloon-esque slums. It's not turquoise dune like I imagined, but rather Magisterium meets Blade Runner. This one wide shot of the city showing the Zealots' authoritarian force above, with the grungy underbelly below, absolutely marvelous. The perspective reinforces the sense of dread. At a moment's notice, Zertonia's religious order could cast you into the abyss for blasphemy. It fills my head with all sorts of questions and curiosities, and I really hope we get to experience the city in a full capacity in later issues. They even managed to weave in the cameos much more organically, building off the previous issue with a solid narrative through line instead of tangential one-offs that bear no significance on the plot or world building. Though, I must say, I'm a bit peeved they spoiled Shockwave's inclusion by advertising a retailer exclusive cover a mere day after it dropped locally. That would have been an incredibly cool surprise, but no, marketing seems much more important apparently. Real shame. Regardless, I have virtually no complaints with this issue. It's easily the best Void Rivals tale to date, and I'm eagerly awaiting the next one. That said, I don't particularly know how they're going to wrap up this particular arc. According to retailer solicitations, there won't be any issues of Void Rivals in either December or January. Apparently Skybound does this so the artist can keep up with the issues instead of swapping over and over again. It's unknown whether this will be a hiatus or a proper conclusion, but I'm definitely going to feel the absence of Void Rivals in December. Still, no use expressing concern, no idea what's going to happen in the story. One thing I can definitely express concern on, however, is the heavy reliance on G.I. Joe. We're dropping Void Rivals, presumably temporarily, for 2 G.I. Joe series and only 1 Transformers story. American fans have expressed a lot of joy for this, however, for the rest of the world, myself included, the prospect seems a smidge concerning. I know there's a lot of love for the series, but from my perspective, G.I. Joe seems like a traditional military tale and not much else. Something that lacks the vastness and creativity of Transformers' spacefaring adventures. Now do keep in mind, G.I. Joe is pretty niche here in Australia. My only exposure is the films, which people tell me are the worst representation. I'm constantly being told by G.I. Joe fans that Renegades is a must-watch, and I may check it out prior to the release of Duke 1. But it seems to me like Transformers is propping up G.I. Joe more than G.I. Joe is propping up Transformers. Like, when I was invited to the premiere of Rise of the Beasts in Australia, the groan the audience gave when they saw the ending stinger was something that will always stick with me. I understand the desire to bring these two franchises together, given they were essentially sister series back in the 80s, but I, and most international fans, signed on for Transformers. I'm open to these series being good, especially with the prospect of Snake Eyes being billed as a horror series, but I can't help but feel they're trying to limit the story of Transformers just so they can develop a Hasbro comic shared universe, with yet another focus on the 80s after we just spent a whole trilogy begging for the toy line to stop doing that. I guess I just want Void Rivals to continue because it's new, fresh, and creative, but instead I'm getting something that, on paper, sounds a lot more boring. Still, it's far too soon to tell. All I can do is wait and hope I'm won over. I can rant all I like, but I can't predict or change the future. I'll just have to see. It took me a while to truly get this issue, as it's quite confronting on your first read. It's definitely one of the grittier takes on Transformers, and the artwork sells you on this right away. I love how grungy and ramshackle the world looks. Writer and artist Daniel Warren Johnson provides a world aesthetic that we haven't really seen done in Transformers before, or at least done well. I get the feeling that was the intent with the first season of War for Cybertron, but I don't believe they really got that across. But while the world and human characters look absolutely gorgeous, I wasn't so sure on the depiction of the Transformers themselves. They just seemed a bit weird and wonky in a way I couldn't put my finger on. Maybe it's because I'm used to the more stylized renditions of the IDW comics, so seeing them drawn in a more traditional modern comic style is a bit jarring at first. Ooh, traditional modern, that's quite oxymoronic. But then you get to the middle of the issue, and this seems a bit concerning. In regards to the death of Bumblebee, it seems like they're following in the footsteps of Transformers Prime, having the Edge front-loaded in a series, then transitioning to the status quo. My initial thoughts were that of dread, as I remembered them designating the 86 movie as their story bible. I was entertaining the depressing reality that they were taking character deaths from that movie and running with them, without understanding why that movie worked. The 86 movie is, by design, a sequel to the G1 cartoon. No one's going to go into this movie without having seen at least a few episodes, and as such, the character deaths hit you like a freight train. Doing that in issue 1 doesn't hold the same emotional impact, it just fails to hit. This is how you get War for Cybertron. This is how you get Transformers Prime. Wow, I'm really shitting on Transformers Prime a lot lately. I blame Plane for this. I was incredibly concerned about the prospect of a comic series with all all edge and no point.
I've seen that, and I never want to see it again.
That was, of course, until I saw the director's commentary livestream. Going through the influences, as well as the challenges Johnson met while drawing robots in a different way, really opened my eyes. His influences of Gundam Origin and various 90s anime really come across on a second reading, particularly in the chaos of the battle. Also, it makes sense now why Optimus Prime looks so much like the Magic Square version. It's literally based on the Magic Square version. It is his go-to Prime. That's kinda neat, actually. The wrestling influences also made a lot more sense with the kinetic energy and weight of each motion. It's clear the decisions aren't just for seriousness, but rather to build something out of passion. Also, much relief with the explanation on the Bumblebee thing. Hearing confirmation that they asked him to change the status quo rather than to sell the seriousness of the story was just what I needed to hear.
I just honestly wanted to change things up. I just wanted to change things up, and I had seen a lot of Bumblebee. I think we all have in a lot of Transformers media, and I just thought it would be a fun little swerve. And this is actually funny. Our contact over at Hasbro was also a little tired of seeing Bumblebee everywhere, and he actually asked before he saw my script. He's like, "Is there any way we can not use Bumblebee in the main line?" And I told him, I was like, "I got good news for you."
This is very much a love it or hate it comic on first read, but if you find yourself a bit iffy on the direction of the story, give the commentary a watch. It might just open your eyes. It did for me, and I can say I'm a lot more confident on the next issue. I'm really glad this issue continues the quality precedent set by the previous release. They're really getting into the implications of the Zertonian society, and I couldn't be happier. The development of the Zertonian religious order, especially Selila's relationship to it, is incredibly intriguing, and I'm eager to see where it goes, hopefully sooner rather than later. I don't think the narrative is as solid as the previous issue, mostly because the emotional center is less in the forefront compared to the rising mystery, but it's still wonderful to see the world and characters get meatier. I'm really glad they turned the duo breakup trope on its head, while still keeping some intrigue intact. It's a lovely way to maintain the tension, but also avoid that groan you get every time a story brings out the third act breakup. Still, I don't think it compares to the last frame of issue 4. The regret, the sorrow, all conveyed expertly in a single frame when the Chancellor is alone. That, to me, is still the high point of the series so far, in regards to both Transformers and Void Rivals. That aside, I also love how the cameos have been building the world more here, instead of just a character showing up then having no bearing on the rest of the plot. I've been seeing an increase in complaints towards these, claiming they have no bearing, but I'm genuinely seeing an improvement between episodes. Jetfire's inclusion was, and still is, baffling. Doubly so because he dies instantly in the first issue of Transformers. But since then, each issue has built on the cameos more. It feels like they're gunning towards a conversion point between the Quintessons and the people of the Sacred Ring. Unfortunately, there's been a noticeable wane in vibrancy in the artwork, however, and I'm not sure I'm a fan of it. The previous issues were incredibly rich with color, everything was deep and vibrant. Conversely, a lot of this feels muted and somewhat drab. I get that the majority of the issue is spent in either a holding cell or a torture chamber, but I don't think it's captured as well as it could be. The artwork between issues is the same, however this time we have a new colorist, Patricio Del Feche instead of Mateus Lopez. Looking at his portfolio, it seems like Del Feche can do great work as both an artist and a colorist, so has got the talent. But for this issue, although he does a decent job, I think I prefer the rich blues and crisp blacks of Lopez. I also wish we got to see more of the Zertonian capital, especially after it was teased in the previous issue, but perhaps that will come in time. Still, all in all, another brilliant issue of Void Rivals, even if it's slightly weaker than the previous one. With the first issue, I was somewhat concerned about the direction the series was going to go. Would it be edge for edge's sake, or would it get into the emotions properly? Issue 2 puts all of those fears to rest. Johnson makes it clear that this one will be driven by emotion above all else, using brutality to accentuate that rather than mask it with edginess. The first issue was really a case of being thrust into an alien world and conflict, a frantic rush to take everything in, only you can't because you really just have to stay alive. In the aftermath of it all, you're finally able to breathe and reflect. These slower moments are really what made me love Transformers, specifically with the IDW 2019 run. I was unfortunately introduced to the franchise too late to jump on the original continuity train. It just seemed too daunting at the time. But in time, I came to love the melancholic nature of the political drama. So slow, character-driven moments are really the kind of things I love, and this is no exception. By now, you've probably seen the scene where Optimus laments the loss of terrestrial life by his hands, and yes, the scene is just as good as everyone claims it is. Prime has been many things throughout the franchise's near 40-year tenure, but this might be one of the first times they've managed to marry many of his different aspects. The fatherly nature of G1 and Beast Wars, the military lead of the Unicron trilogy, the uncertainty in his actions from War for Cybertron and Rise of the Beasts, only actually good, the ultra-violence of the movies. It's all here and all balanced. And in this poignant scene and the discussion after it, Johnson blends everything that Optimus Prime is effortlessly. It's the kind of characterization that really hits fans close after a long time of bastardization. Not to say that taking a new direction with a character is particularly a bad thing, it's just, in regards to Optimus Prime, lately there's been a lot of lukewarm portrayals that neither pay tribute to the old nor forge a new path. With this new run, it's the joy you feel when you finally watch My Adventures with Superman, seeing him finally care about doing the right thing, saving people and becoming a beacon of hope. Or the BBC co-production of his Dark Materials, where the characters actually exhibit the range and depth they were portrayed with in the books, and the philosophy wasn't shied away from because audiences dumb. It's the emotional core that makes the ultra-violence actually hit in the way it's supposed to. Brilliant issue overall, though they could have dropped the family talk a bit. Family. Thank God we got Lopez back for this issue, because he was kinda needed for this artwork. And I absolutely mean that in a good way. In previous issues, I kept begging for them to show the rest of the city. And now, they've delivered. The entire thing is basically a game of cat and mouse, up and down the streets between the monorails and the slums. The Zotonian capital is utterly gorgeous. It really feels like a lived-in world, something that's difficult to do in most forms of media. Even if it was brief, it's definitely satisfied my desire to see more of the city. Thank you, Lorenzo, you beautiful man. I know you probably don't watch these, but it feels like this was done for me. Again, the good Lorenzo, not the bad one. If anything, the artwork is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, because the actual story is just okay. I don't know, the foreshadowing and hinting doesn't hit as hard. It seems like they're sowing the seeds for tangible entities rather than the greater implications of the society and plot progression. Salila's backstory and turmoil seems interesting, but at this point they've dragged it out for what is essentially months. In a fast-ish paced comic like this, where they're not relying on decompressed storytelling, the tension is kinda dissipated. Hopefully the next arc gets into the details better, because right now, I'm good. I like that they're really pushing the Quintesson arc into full conversion with the Sacred Ring story, but it doesn't lead to anything. The arc kinda just stops. It's less the end of a story arc and more a stopping point in the middle of a story. I'm still incredibly hyped for its return, and I'm really glad they've confirmed the series will be back in March. At least it's shorter than the wait for Doctor Who. But still, the ending feels like it just fizzled out, instead of went out with a bang. I'm sure people reading this well after the fact won't be bothered by it, but as a monthly reader, it is kinda annoying. Ultimately, definitely one of the better issues, but not the best stopping point before the hiatus. Might be too soon to tell, but it seems like we're getting into a rhythm between issue releases of tension and release. Last issue was a slower burn, but here we're back to the heavy metal insanity. I really appreciate the emphasis we get on the human hatred. So many continuities tell us that humans hate the Transformers.
I lost a sister in Chicago.
But it's rare we actually get to see it for ourselves. For once, we can actually bear witness to them taking agency in the Transformers conflict, where their actions actually move the narrative forward. It's being done more in recent times, but this is probably the best use of it I've seen so far. Much as I love Earthspark, that show is stronger in its allegorical content. This issue hits me with its emotional core, and I love it. And when the action kicks off, it's a true sight to behold. Johnson's love of wrestling really lets him block out the action scenes well. And already in issue 3, we're getting what may end up being the most iconic action shots of the continuity. I love how Skywarp actually gets to use his teleportation powers. Seems like this franchise is finally making use of it between this and Earthspark. And that last shot, Jesus Christ, chills. I see people claiming this is the best representation of Optimus Prime they've ever done. And while I feel that statement is a bit premature, the seeds are definitely being sown to build to that. If they keep this version consistent and give him a proper story arc to grow, something that's either been poorly executed or missing entirely in past incarnations, we'll definitely have a winner on our hands. Regardless, my mind has truly been put to rest now when it comes to the caretakership of this series under this company. Easily the best issue of the series yet. And a wonderful comic to cap off this year of Skybound releases. Due to delays in shipments to Australia, Duke 1 did not release Down Under until January 3rd, 2024. As such, I'm not counting it in this year's retrospective. There will likely be a short on it sometime after this video goes up, but for now we're just focusing on 2023 releases, and at least where I live, this ain't one of them. The Energon universe had a lot to prove getting off the ground. It might seem like a walk in the park, given a famous and currently in the public eye production company was helming it, but there were a lot of hurdles to overcome. The previous comics run had been received as inaccessible at best and boring to casual readers at worst. In retrospect, it was a wonderful hidden gem amongst the tapestry of Transformers media, but that didn't matter because ultimately people didn't want what it was cooking. After its unfortunate lukewarm perception, fans of the franchise were hesitant to get invested in another major continuity. They didn't want to get burned again, and it didn't matter that they had burned themselves by perceiving the previous comic as something it wasn't. The damage was done, to no fault of IDW, but rather to simple perception. Honestly, I chalk it up to Hasbro and marketing, but that's just me. As for general fans, well, that was a whole other problem in itself. I am by no means a comic expert, but even I can see the general discourse towards comics heavily criticizes the confusing continuity maps, making it difficult to find jumping on points. Perhaps that's why the sales of manga and readership of manhwa are through the roof, while typical franchise comics keep getting bodied by Captain Underpants. And please, don't chalk this up to woke culture. The anti-progressive narrative has no basis whatsoever on comic sales. It's stupid. Captain Underpants is gay, Skybound's Energon universe is blatantly pacifist, I suck dick, and your bigoted opinions don't matter. So Skybound had two hurdles to overcome: burned out Transformers fans and burned out general comics fans. Fortunately, they were able to overcome both because Void Rivals took its rightful place as holy shit, the #1 UIP of the year! Honestly, this is quite shocking because in the circles I frequent, I see nobody talking about it. In the new year, people have slowly been getting interested in the Transformers side of the things, but nobody I recommend Void Rivals to seems to be interested. So it's surprising, but also extremely gratifying to hear that Void Rivals has been doing insanely well. It's had its issues, particularly at the start, but it really managed to grow into its own series and cement itself as one of the great modern Transformers adjacent properties. Derek and Salila took a while to truly move beyond their archetypes as the aloof maverick and the stick in the mud, but by issue 4 they'd well and truly developed, and it was a true joy to see. Without a doubt, these were the characters I was the most invested in any form of media I engaged with in 2023, and I engaged with some good media in 2023. The cameos with Transformers characters also got a lot better by the later issues, or should I say, side plot players. It soon became clear that these cutaways were building to something a lot bigger than what was initially anticipated. I've seen people still complaining that they have no bearing on the main story, and while that was definitely true at the start, it was far from the case by the end. Also, great job reimagining the Skuxoid. I went back and rewatched the original G1 episode he was introduced in, and dear god, he was pathetic. In this outing, I actually felt invested in his survival. He's sort of the everyman, performing some scummy deeds but ultimately getting by. Well, it seems that way at least. Could be a major plot twist later down the line, but I kinda doubt that. Just hope we see more of him at a later date. The mail-in segment in issue 6 also revealed more non-Cybertronian races would make their debut later down the line, which has me kinda intrigued. Just hope it's not the Nebulons. I've never liked the symbiosis take on the Headmasters. I've always preferred the body just being a mech suit for the smaller Headmaster, but that's just me. One thing I've adored from the very beginning is the environmental storytelling. Every background has little touches made to it. They're pure ecstasy to look at. Felici's masterwork in the art cannot be understated, and I sincerely hope he returns with the end of the hiatus in March. For a while, I couldn't really place my finger on what it reminded me of. I kept looking at the cyberpunk-esque art style, and something seemed familiar, but I couldn't remember it. Then we hit the Zertonian Society, and it hit me. Hyperlight Drifter. The overall vibe of this comic is eerily similar. Of course, it's likely just a coincidence, much like the comparisons to Xenogears. But if this comic goes in similar directions, we're in for a real treat. Of course, with the info dumps at the beginning, it was somewhat difficult to take in the artwork at first. It definitely felt like establishing the universe was a smidge clunky, but once they weren't forcing themselves to introduce a billion concepts at once, the pacing really cleared up and it was effortless taking in the atmosphere and emotions. Of course, some of the readers were quick to use this new style of storytelling as ammunition to voice disdain against the previous IDW outings, but as seen in the question column of issue 4, the writers really have a respect for what's come before. Sure, they're going in a new direction, but it's not vindictive and egotistical. That I respect. A lot of nostalgic media falls into these trappings in the modern age. The phrase, "I want to do it right this time," can go one of two ways. And fortunately, it's clear that Kirkman and his team aren't going down the easy rabbit hole of treating the audience like they don't know what they want. And only the writers are smart enough to comprehend the future of the franchise. They just want to make a good story, and by god, they've managed to damn well. Of course, this does come with the caveat that the arc just kinda stops without a decent jumping off point. The hiatus between issues 6 and 7 is, to be honest, a bit poorly timed. The ending stinger just did nothing for me, and my hype in the upcoming issues is based solely on the quality of what's come before, not the prospect of where the story is going. I don't think it's too much of a request to ask for both, but at least they've crafted out a solid story that I'm excited to see continue. At least I'm more excited for this than the G.I. Joe outings, but that's just me. Now, while I'm more invested in Void Rivals personally, from a storytelling perspective, I think Transformers is a better crafted comic series. Everything here just feels more purposeful, more thoughtful, more poignant. Perhaps it's the influence of the director's commentary live streams, shedding light on the creative process. Maybe that's coloring my views somewhat, seeing Johnson's storytelling framework an absolute joy in the creation of this world. But I just feel like the Transformers ongoing series does a better job of conveying its themes. The themes, of course, are pacifism and non-violence. This might seem contradictory, given this comic is perhaps the most violent since Generation 2. However, Johnson is very clear in outlining the dichotomy between the two sides. The way in which the Autobots and Decepticons perceive war and human life are purposefully very different. If you're not seeing it in the comic itself, take it from the author.
In no way was I trying to do this for laughs or in any way like disrespectful to the character of Optimus Prime. I honestly felt like this is the perfect 180 contrast to Starscream in issue 1 squishing a dude. It felt like the perfect 1-2 of Starscream squishing and then Optimus accidentally hurting not even a human but an innocent deer and being completely wrecked.
It's clear from the way this comic is laid out, cutting from the sacrifices the Decepticons revel in to the preservation the Autobots strive for, that this comic is far from gratuitous. There's a big argument in media about edge versus grit, when something is truly gritty and when it is just reveling in edginess without any point. Discerning one or the other is multifaceted, with enough discussion for an entire Diagnosis Insanity on its own. But one big factor is point. Take the original Castlevania, for instance. This show was dark and gruesome and downright nihilistic at times, but it never lost track of the light at the end of the tunnel. Through friendship and family, through casting aside oppressions of dogmas, humanity was able to bring itself out of the darkness and fight for its right of existence. It's a gritty show, but it never feels edgy. Of course, at the end of the show's run, writer Warren Ellis was let go from the project due to consistent harassment. Rightfully so, mind you. Toxic individuals should be removed from workplaces for the safety of others. But the production company also has a responsibility to hire a replacement up to the task, and when a new writer receives caretakership, they have a responsibility to build on the existing foundation. Castlevania Nocturne does not do this. It fills its runtime with shocking imagery and show-redefining plot twists, but there's no narrative thread. There's thematic consistency, but no arcs planned out for each character. Aside from really just Richter, I don't know where the show is going, but I do know it's dark and depressing. So, in essence, and I must have said this in a video before somewhere, it's a pizza cutter. It's all edge, but no point. When it comes to Skybound's outing, this is very much a Castlevania situation, not that of Nocturne. We can see Starscream slowly descend into Magnus, Optimus work to secure a future for his fellow Autobots. The humans come to respect their Cybertronian brethren. Things are progressing, things are moving, and it has a story to tell instead of disconnected plot beats. So far, we've only had 3 issues, 4 if you count everything out when this video drops, and so much has already been conveyed. Johnson has made it clear from his streams that he's a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to conveying characters and themes, doing so as economical as possible. So much needs to be crammed into such a short time frame. A far cry from the more decompressed nature of Void Rivals, but it never feels overbearing. A lot of that is likely due to the art style. I really like that although Johnson labors over each page endlessly, trying to make everything perfect, there's always that rough and tumble feel to it. It's not perfect, it's scratched and slightly sketchy, and I appreciate it. It adds to the grungy nature of the storytelling, intentional or not. A bit of scuff really helps make the art feel personal, instead of a faceless corporation. Though mainly the live streams where he goes over this stuff could use less scuff. One who has more stream scuff, Daniel Warren Johnson or Monarch. Even when the story gets deep and meaty, I really like that Johnson is able to have fun with it. The wrestling references have of course been pointed out, but friend Queen Tylene actually mentioned that the arm slap is a reference to Gundam. Johnson might have also referenced that in the stream, but I can't recall. He also likes putting in things like the planes from Independence Day, or the alt mode of Prowl so he has a reason to exist in-universe, or license plates referring to the previous comics he's worked on. Little things like that really make this a joy to read. Word on the street is he'll remain as writer, but step back from artwork somewhere between issues 6 and 8. 2008. Different issues contradict each other on when this will occur, and we still don't know who it's going to be. Whoever it is, they're going to have big shoes to fill, and I'm definitely going to miss Johnson's artwork contribution. Still, at least he'll have time to faceplant into third-party legends. Yes, become obsessed, just like me! So, was Skybound successful in establishing the Energon universe in 2023? Fucking oath it was! While the online part of the fandom is taking a while, the actual comics themselves have been selling out left and right. So glad we live in an age of pre-orders, because I'd definitely be missing out on these otherwise. I know Diamond Bolt and that toy guy have both had troubles picking up some of the earlier issues, and as frustrating as it may seem, it goes to show that these are selling very well. I have no doubt that Transformers and Void Rivals will both sell exceptionally well into 2024. So, really, the biggest leap going forward will be the introduction of G.I. Joe. Kirkman definitely has the right idea keeping the maximum of concurrent series at 4, to make sure readers don't get confused. Given the aforementioned comic book sales issues, limiting the scope is a sound choice. Thing is, while I'm sure G.I. Joe will sell well in America, worldwide is a completely different story. Getting 2 miniseries for the Joes seems a bit much in my book. Almost as if Hasbro is trying to generate interest forcefully at the expense of everyone else. This hypothesis seems more solid when you consider Duke's inclusion in issue 3 was a Hasbro mandate, not an idea that was brought about by Johnson or Kirkman. I'm open to G.I. Joe being a cornerstone of this outing, and I appreciate Kirkman setting the ground rules on this universe, not expanding to other Hasbro franchises, because already this is a bit much. But I remain skeptical, as efforts to bring the two together have been mixed throughout the years. Extremely mixed. Regardless though, I'll still have my Void Rivals, and I'll still have my Transformers. I'll still have my wonderful stories from Robert Kirkman and Daniel Warren Johnson, and I couldn't be happier. Going into this, I genuinely didn't think this comic would make an impact. In an age of gritty reboots that give a rat's ass about neither the source material nor pushing to new heights, I expected this to be more edgy, drivel, devoid of substance. I was proven wrong. Wrong on so many levels. And you know what? Being wrong is great. Sure, a story that you're hyped for meeting expectations is nice and all, but one that takes you by surprise, one that catches you off guard, one that you know nothing about and are blown away by, that's something truly special. So kudos, Skybound. You finally cracked the code on a mature G1, and I, for one, am incredibly excited to see where you go from here.
What the f am I reading?